The three of us work together as the Baltimore Development Cooperative, and we're going to talk about an ongoing project that was started in 2007 called Participation Park, which is based on converting a vacant lot in East Baltimore into a squatted urban farm and social space. And do we have to do that? You want to advance them?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. And we just want to note that this project is collaborative and involves lots of people who couldn't be here today, so this presentation is necessarily limited to our perspectives. To provide some context, Baltimore, like many post-industrial cities in the U.S., has lost about a third of its population since 1950, resulting in over 40,000 vacant buildings and 11,000 vacant lots. The majority of these properties are concentrated in East and West Baltimore in neighborhoods that have suffered from decades of disinvestment and have little access to resources such as jobs, public transit, grocery stores, green spaces, etc. This condition has made them vulnerable to speculative and anti-democratic forms of urban planning and development, which privilege increased tax revenues and private profit over the basic needs of residents. For example, in 2005, Johns Hopkins, not far from Participation Park, Johns Hopkins University and the city used eminent domain to take 80 acres of land for a new biotech park, displacing over 300 families who had lived in the neighborhood for generations. Against this kind of neoliberal urbanization, which David Harvey describes as accumulation by dispossession, we decided to squat a 1/3 acre vacant lot and initiate a process of bottom-up planning to transform the space into a commons or people's park. And one concept that has really inspired this project is the idea of the right to the city, which can be understood essentially as the right for everyone to participate in an ongoing process of remaking the city in response to common needs and desires. Another thing that informed this project from the beginning was our previous experience doing temporary interventions in public space, in which we would take over a vacant lot or part of a street for a day and set up an outdoor kitchen, free store, or sewing workshop. We found that there was a limit to the kinds of relationships and solidarities that could be generated in these temporary situations, and wanted to experiment with a more long-term, site-specific intervention that was also more integrated with our everyday lives. Based on initial conversations with residents, we decided to start a community garden on the site for several reasons. We wanted to learn how to grow our own organic vegetables, and we thought that the activity of gardening and sharing food would help foster new relationships and build community around the space. We also saw urban agriculture as a kind of Trojan horse that could be used to legitimize our occupation of the land and get nonprofit funding. During the first season, we established a large garden with no fence, and all the food was distributed for free within the neighborhood. We also recognized the potential danger that this strategy, along with our position as white artists, could become a beautification initiative and ultimately contribute to gentrification. This is a problem we continually struggle with, and it makes the generation of diverse participation a central challenge of the project.
So, moving forward, we work closely together and we agree to disagree a lot. But that's one of the beauties of this practice and this project. Participation Park has been as much about BDC's own experiment and collectivity as it been about neighborhood scale experiment and democracy. Every year we continue to ask similar questions about what new forms and methods can propagate greater social equality, spatial justice, and ecological sustainability. The idea that the garden could function as a multi-purpose tool continued to be in our main strategy to bring people together to question the politics of land use in the city. In the words of Felix Guattari, to bring individuals out of themselves, to disengage themselves from their immediate preoccupations in order to reflect on the present and future of the world. We decided just being there over enough time would be the modest means to communicate, reflect, and build new subjectivities in ultimately a different city. As Mitchell has written, public space is not a given right or as a technical matter of planning and design, but rather is produced and claimed through acts of political representation. So, through the act of squatting, we created a self-organized space by simply being visible and working in public. This slow, prefigurative process would be a form of resistance against the great American contradiction that private property is the only device for achieving a free society. Instead of employing conventional organizing strategies like door knocking and flyering, we wanted to break down the dichotomy of the artist organizer and the community. Rather than assuming that a coherent community already exists in the neighborhood and we were outside of it just because we didn't live there, we wanted to build a new community around this common space. We didn't want to drop in and impose a definition on the space either, but rather allow it to emerge through a process of collaboration. These approaches worked to some degree in the first year. We built friendships through which we became familiar with the micropolitics and history of the neighborhood. People became invested in the space, growing food in the garden, or just keeping an eye out, chasing the kids away who were throwing tomatoes at each other. Ironically, in the second year, the young people in the neighborhood became the most active users of the space, claiming a real ownership of the garden, spray painting kids' garden everywhere. The park became the learning site for them. We prepared food We prepared food in the garden together and weekly events called Salad Saturdays. We also worked together with the kids to build tables, informational signs for vegetables, and at times temporarily transforming the space into an adventure playground. The park remained without a fence, and all the food continued to be distributed for free, and over time, other groups have gotten involved. We have a composting station at the park that Food Not Bombs, the Red Emma's, the Radical Bookstore and Coffee House dropped the organic waste at. Students from local schools have visited on field trips, and we've organizing network cookouts with other social justice groups. Frustratingly, though, our efficiency in growing communally created a surplus of food and became difficult to distribute, which made us raise the question, has this project become too occupied with farming, and had it, in effect, closed down the possibilities for other activities? While the overwhelming energies of the kids, our shoestring budget, and our exhaustive volunteerism also made us rethink how do we generate greater sustainable participation.
Yeah, like Nick was saying, going into the third year, there were a lot of questions to face concerning the effectiveness of the park. How can we organize more constructive educational activities for the young people in the neighborhood? And how can we generate resources autonomously without being dependent on grant money? How sustainable is squatting as a strategy for long-term land security? This rethinking phase produced several new experiments. One was a collaboration with a group called Bugs to produce a series of workshops on gardening and nutrition for the kids. Another experiment was to start a worker-run farming cooperative to sell food to local restaurants at farmers markets and to provide for a small CSA program for families in the neighborhood. The co-op accepts a variety of payment methods from cash on a sliding scale, sweat equity, trade and barter, and we're working on how to accept food stamps. We were also able to sell heirloom tomatoes to some of the best restaurants in the city, which brought more income for the co-op and increased the visibility of the park. Looking forward, we're working to partner with other local organizations to develop programming at the park. We'll be teaching a class through the new Baltimore Free School next spring, and we're collaborating with Healthcare for the Homeless to start a gardening club with their clients. We plan to build a large van shell or pavilion to host performances and other social activities. One issue that continually arises in discussions about the future of the project is land security. While we see squatting as an act of protest against a system of private property that excludes people from participating